የሰው ልጅ ክቡር ሰው መሆን ክቡር ሰው ሞቷል ሰው ሊያድን ሰውን ሲያከብር በደግነት በፍቅር በክብር ተጠርቶ በክብር ይሄዳል ሰው ሊኖር ሰው ሞቱ
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being patient as we let you all in. My name is Tigist Hailu. I'm the current president of ECMA, the Ethiopian Community Mutual Assistance Association in the New York tri-state area. And as some of you may know, ECMA was established over 40 years ago as an independent, non-for-profit association with no political or religious affiliation. We are committed to serving the needs of the Ethiopian community in the tri-state through cultural and educational activities such as this. And for many years, we have been honoring our Ethiopian history with this annual commemoration, which we're very excited to present to you today. I would now like to recognize contributors to the events of the past. We would like to present the posthumous award to the late Ambassador Imru Zallaka for his contributions to the Yekatit 12 event in 2017. His family wants to send their regards, and I will read to you what his daughter Ade Imru has written to us on the family's behalf. She says, quote, "On behalf of my sister, Weziro Saba Imru, and myself, I would like to express our deepest appreciation to the Ethiopian Community Mutual Assistance Association of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut for the posthumous award presented to our beloved late father, Ambassador Imru Zallaka. We are sure that he was immensely pleased to have had the opportunity to make a presentation to your esteemed association. There's nothing our father liked better than to share his passion and concern for his beloved Ethiopia and his compatriots, whom he always strove to inspire and motivate. We take this opportunity to wish ECMA of every success in the important role it plays in helping our community. With gratitude and respect, Ade Imru." So as I mentioned, ECMA would like to present the posthumous award to the late Ambassador Imru for his recognize his participation in the ECMA Yekatit 12 program in 2017. So thank you to him and his family. We would also like to present a certificate of recognition to Dr. Girma Ababa for his participation in our annual Yekatit 12 program. He shared his eyewitness experience about the unforgettable massacre conducted by the Graziani on Yekatit 12 in 1929. He spoke of the importance of Ethiopians commemorating this day together in the spirit of fraternity to pay respect to our forefathers who fought and died for our freedom. Dr. Girma was not able to attend today, but we will mail his certificate to his home. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. This event is being recorded and broadcasted via Facebook Live. So we ask you to stay on mute during the presentation, but encourage everyone that feels comfortable to keep their cameras on if they'd like. And there will be an opportunity at the end for discussions and questions. Now I would like to introduce one of our organizers to begin the event. Gash Berhane.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe good evening or good morning, who is watching in different zone from home on live Facebook. On behalf of the Ethiopian Community Mutual Assistance Association of New York, New Jersey, in short ECMA, and the Global Alliance for Justice, the Ethiopian cause, It is a great pleasure to welcome you all in this virtual setting to commemorate the Yekatit massacre of our fellow Ethiopians by fascist Italy 86 years ago. On March 1, 1896, 127 years ago, under the leadership of Emperor Menelik, the sacrifice was made by our forefathers near the town of Adwa. The farmers, the soldiers, including women, prevailed in sealing Ethiopians' independence and making it the only African country never to be colonized. My name is Yekatit. I am on the advisory board of the ECMA. We gather here today, as we have been doing over the past 9 years, to remember our fellow heroes. Before we start our program, let us observe a minute of silence and think about the atrocities committed against our people by fascist Italy from 1935 to 1941, and the sacrifice were made by our forefathers in the Battle of Adwa. So we're gonna silence for a few seconds. As many of you may know, ECMA and the Global Alliance have worked together to educate the public on the crime committed by fascist Italy against our people by inviting historians and human rights activists to speak about it. In addition, we report readings showing documentary video, as well as inviting survivors to give eyewitness testimonies. As a community, we must continue to fulfill our responsibility so that our history is remembered from generation to generation. In my conclusion, we all know in our hearts that the sacrifice made by our forefathers allowed us to stand and walk in freedom and peace. As they say, peace and freedom are linked. There can be no freedom without peace. If there is, it means living in a terrible state. Our Ethiopian heroes fought for freedom and peace in every way they could. We'll never forget this heroic battle. We'll never allow peace and freedom to be reversed, because we owe a real tangible obligation to our forefathers. Without further ado, I would like to extend special thanks to my colleagues Adam Ali, who will introduce the speaker and moderate the program. Please, Adam, the floor is yours.
Adam, you're muted.
Oh, thank you for letting me know, Kazan, and thank you for the introduction, Brahana, Gash Brahana, as we like to call him around ECMA here. Today, we have great presentations for you. We're going to start with Professor Raymond Jonas from Washington University. And then we also have some poems, as well as a YouTube video on one of the unsung heroes of the Yekatit Astrolet era. And then I also like to apologize on behalf of ECMA for the little delay in the start of the program. Without much further ado, I will Professor, you can take it away.
Good. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone. In fact, I want to thank the entire Ethiopian Community Mutual Assistance Association, and especially Adam Ali and Berhane Tadese, as well as President Tegest Hailu, for inviting me to speak today to talk about the Battle of Adwa. It would take a week, I think, to lay before you the entire story of Adwa and its aftermaths. But today I'm going to focus on 3 aspects of the battle. First, I'm going to introduce you to some of the key personalities on the Ethiopian side. Let me share my screen with you. Some of the key personalities on the Ethiopian side. And then I'm going to talk about the massive mobilization and the creative strategic thinking that led to Ethiopian victory. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about the place of Adwa in global history. So let's start by looking at a map. We'll get everybody properly situated. And there we are. To look at the Eastern Mediterranean, Northeast Africa, and the Red Sea, just to make sure we're all in the same place. The story of Adwa has at its core a number of compelling personalities. And of course, among them, and chief among them, is Menelik, a provincial monarch who claimed biblical ancestry, originating with a liaison between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And Menelik parlayed these assets into a claim on the Ethiopian throne. He had more than inspired ancestry in his favor. He had an acute strategic imagination. He also had a key collaborator, Taitu Betul. A youthful prophecy told her that she would wear a crown someday. And when she married Menelik at the age of 30, she made good on this prophecy. When they met, when Menelik and Taitu met, he was merely king of Showa, a province in southern Ethiopia. Menelik's marriage to Taitu gave him a smart, energetic political partner with a power base to the north. And this relationship helped to confirm Menelik as a leader with national credentials. In addition to this geographic balance, Taitu brought a shrewd political sense. She was a strong personality who didn't shrink from harsh measures. A blend of her maximalism and Menelik's brilliant gamesmanship culminated in the triumph at Adwa. Ethiopian triumph, though, owed as much to soft power propaganda as it did to blood and iron. By appealing to sympathies abroad, Ethiopia pioneered the strategy of modern anti-colonial struggles. The campaign for hearts and minds. Since 1878, Menelik had relied on Swiss engineer Alfred Ilg for advice in dealing with Europe. Taitu and Menelik repeatedly sent Ilg on missions to Europe. They sent him with shopping lists for technology, such as farming equipment and a printing press and a cartridge reloader. Sometimes Taitu would ask him to pick up a pair of European shoes. We know that she wore a European size 39, for example. But his main responsibility was to carry out a public opinion campaign in Europe and to shape Menelik's image and that of Ethiopia. In a series of brilliant strokes, Ilg assimilated Ethiopia to European landscapes and conventions. In other words, tried to make Ethiopia understandable to Europeans as a way of preparing European public opinion. He touted Ethiopia as Africa's Switzerland, an image that he boosted in a postcard campaign. The card featured a collage of pleasing images, Menelik in regal profile, Ethiopia's rugged high mountains, and Tukul, rendered in suspiciously Swiss orderliness. He also secured the key markers of sovereignty, postage stamps and coins, embossed with Menelik's likeness. In 1892, he brought on board a journalist to help him, a journalist named Casimir Mondon Vidale, who regularly sent colorful reports to the European press. The official portrait that Menelik's public relations team featured him as a serene head of state with a large crucifix worn high at the neck. And of course, this is an attempt to, again, to make Menelik and make Ethiopians understandable in European terms. European newspapers obligingly printed the portrait, and American newspapers too, for that matter, as they played up a sympathetic image of Ethiopia's Christian monarch. In the end, though, it would take armed force to defend Ethiopia. The Italians established a foothold at the Red Sea port of Massawa in 1885. And this was really a high-stakes game. Menelik received firearms and cash in exchange for his support of Italian expansion west and south out of Massawa, creating a colony the Italians called Eritrea. A treaty signed at Wuchale shortly after Menelik became emperor of all Ethiopia in 1889 was to have sealed a long-term relationship between the two countries. But once secure on the imperial throne, Menelik turned against his former allies. Disputes over the treaty and the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea led to open warfare in 1895. By the fall of 1895, Italian troops were well south of the agreed upon frontier. They pushed as far south as Lake Ashenge, which is 250 miles north of Addis Ababa. Italy now occupied an additional 7,000 square miles of Ethiopian territory, an area, in fact, about the size of New Jersey in terms of the tri-state area. Let's shift our attention now to Addis Ababa, the imperial capital. It's Saturday, market day, and two heralds make their way to a position overlooking the market. Each carried a staff topped by banners in the imperial colors of green and red. A horn sounds, people gather around to hear the imperial proclamation. The emperor was calling Ethiopia to arms. Ethiopia was going to war. Now, Ethiopia did not have a national army. What it did have was a military tradition that made service in the militia a social and religious obligation. The call to arms was repeated in towns and villages. On the appointed day, the men moved toward established rendezvous points where they were led by local leaders. The risk in this informal system of creating an army was the risk of disobedience and disloyalty. It is, after all, a decentralized system. Menelik was the emperor of Ethiopia, but he had clawed his way into that position, and he had made enemies along the way. In his 5 years as emperor, he had built a web of relationships based on marriage, based on trust, but also based on blood and intimidation. The success of the mobilization and the success of the campaign that would culminate at Adwa depended on the strength of those relationships. His closest supporters included his cousin, Makonnen, the brother of Empress Taitu, Wele, and Mikhail, a convert from Islam and viceroy in the land of the Wollo Oromo. But he also needed Mangasha, the resentful son of Menelik's predecessor, Johannes, Tekle king of Gojam, and rival for the throne, as well as Alula, who resented Menelik's earlier dealings with the Italians. These relationships would be tested on the march. Up until the eve of battle, Italian intelligence reports crackled with speculation about who might peel away from Menelik, leave his army, and thus leave Ethiopia fatally exposed. Menelik and Taitu would personally lead the march northward from Addis. We're looking here at a period map. Troops in the south would assemble just outside the capital, while subordinates would join with their forces at points along the way, Lake Ashenge, Ambalaje, and Mekele, farther north, as well as other points in between. When Menelik and Taitu left Addis on the 11th of October, it would be 3 months before most of this army would make its first contact with the enemy. With every step, the imperial couple would be testing local opinion and loyalty, especially among these subordinates who had pledged to join the defense of Ethiopia. Thus, it was really more than a military march. Menelik's mobilization and his progress northward was a referendum and a procession. And in fact, it had all the spectacle of a mobile court. Taitu, of course, was part of the march. And here she's really taking a substantial risk. She would share in the risk of defeat, which would certainly have meant the loss of power and possibly the loss of her life. She gloried in a march that put power and splendor on display. Her entourage numbered more than 1,000. This is her personal entourage, and it dwarfed all but the emperor's entourage. A mounted soldier sounded a horn to announce her arrival. Then came a military guard, followed by the empress herself, veiled and mounted on a mule. She was followed at a distance by the women of the court, each of whom carried a brightly colored umbrella. Her musical detail, she had musical accompaniment, numbered over 100 musicians. And thanks to them, she never lacked for a soundtrack. Taitu's performers played and sang a musical motif that repeated after 4 measures. You can see that motif here. The end of the day was no less brilliant. A group charged with setting up the royal tents would fly into action. They started with the emperor's tent of red velvet, then the tent of the empress, followed by yet another tent used for royal audiences. Poles 6 meters long were set into the earth. Fabric for the tent roof was stretched across. Carpets were set down on the floor, and the emperor's divan was assembled and cushions were set out. Walls of fine silk were hoisted into place. Green, yellow, and red pennants streamed from the top of the tent. In less than an hour, the imperial court was ready for business. There were 2 smaller military confrontations during the Adwa campaign, prior to the battle itself. And these are really important, I think, for understanding the campaign as a whole and its success. The first of these occurred in December of 1895, when Menelik's advanced guard, commanded by Makonnen, confronted an Italian outpost at a natural fortress known as Ambalaje. The Italian commander, Major Pietro Toselli, was commander of the outpost. He expected to face a modest Ethiopian force. As recently as July of 1895, he anticipated a force of no more than 4,500. Instead, from the heights of Ambalaje, Toselli and his men watched in awe as Makonnen's forces, nearly 40,000 strong, streamed over the passes into the valley opposite. And in an instant, the situation confronting Toselli and his men and Italy itself changed radically. Toselli wrote to headquarters in disbelief. In Italian, he wrote, "Sono molti, molti." They are many, many. And it was only Menelik's advanced guard. This sheer imbalance of forces, Toselli had perhaps 2,000 soldiers against 40,000 for Makonnen, left little doubt as to the outcome when the fighting began at 6:30 on the morning of December 7th. By the time the fighting was over, the retreat turned into a massacre. Here we see an illustration of Makonnen in triumph. The next step in Menelik's advance was Mekelle. There, Major Giuseppe Galliano and a force of 12,000 men were holed up in a fort. Their job was to delay the Ethiopian advance as long as possible while reinforcements arrived from Italy at a rate of 3 troop ships a week. Here's an illustration showing the fort at Mekele and the Ethiopian attack. The Ethiopians lay siege to the fort. Repeated attempts to take it by force failed. In the end, it was a shortage of water that forced a negotiated surrender. Galliano's forces held out until January 20th, when a white flag was raised over the fort. After Mekele, there was nothing standing between Menelik's army and the main Italian force at Adigrat. And that's where the Italian commander, Oreste Baratieri, was concentrating his forces of 18,000 men. What happened next was the most important military decision of the campaign. Because rather than march north to confront the Italian forces at Adigrat, like this, we have an illustration. So rather than lead them north to Adigrat, Menelik instead led his army away to the west, like this. Why didn't he march directly on Adigrat? Armies are supposed to fight armies, right? But to attack Adigrat would have meant sending Ethiopian troops against fortified positions, where they would be cut down by Italian fire, just as had happened at Mekele. Instead, Menelik chose to ignore Adigrat, push past it, and in doing so, threaten Eritrea itself. So he's going to bypass to outflank the Italians. The question now is, what should the Italians do? The prudent move would have been to abandon Adigrat and retreat into Eritrea to prevent being outflanked. Instead, they decided to pursue Menelik. On the 5th of February, Menelik halted about 25 miles west of Adigrat at Gundapta. Baratieri set up his forces about 5 miles away, and then operations stalled. Neither army wished to put itself at risk by attacking the other. The military standoff ended in the final week of February, when Menelik moved his forces farther westward near the town of Adwa. There we go. A week later, there we go. And then a week later, the Italians advanced by night to occupy the passes east of Adwa. Here we go, a detailed map of the battle at Adwa. The plan was to occupy the passes east of Adwa, Semayata, Rayo being two of the landmarks there. However, the leading Italian brigade overshot its rendezvous point and descended down into the valley close to the town of Adwa itself. A little after 6 a.m. on the 1st of March, these forces startled Ethiopian sentries who fired warning shots to alert the rest of the Ethiopian forces and then took cover. The Battle of Adwa began. When the remaining Italian brigades arrived, they took up positions that allowed the Ethiopians to define them, and then having divided them, to defeat them. It's like this. Menelik wasted no time exploiting the Italian mistake. He ordered a column of 15,000 Ethiopian soldiers into the gap. effectively cutting the Italian army into two and pinning the remainder of the Italian army at the passes. Although combat would continue into the afternoon and sporadic fighting would continue well after dark, by 9:30 a.m., that is to say, already in the morning, the Battle of Adwa was effectively over. Okay, let's think about Adwa now a little bit and look at the context. There's so much that could be said about the events of the 1st of March, including the desperate retreat of Italian forces and the horrific loss of life on both sides. There are also many fascinating tales surrounding the fate of men taken prisoner by the Ethiopian army. Many of them, most of them, in fact, marched back to Addis Ababa. But in the time remaining, I want to make a couple of observations about the Adwa campaign and its longer term and even global impacts. First, as a conventional military campaign, the Adwa campaign deserves a place among the great campaigns of modern times. If we look at scale alone, Robert E. Lee's Gettysburg campaign during the American Civil War covered about 125 miles. Also in the Civil War, General Sherman's March to the Sea from Atlanta to Savannah traversed 300 miles. The Adwa campaign spanned 5 months and 580 miles from Addis to Adwa. It was rivaled among 19th century military campaigns only by Napoleon's Russian campaign, which spanned 3 months and 490 miles from Vilnius to Moscow. Unlike Napoleon's Russian campaign, of course, the Adwa campaign ended in victory. These figures help us to understand why the Adwa campaign deserves to be rescued from historical neglect. We really need to recognize the admirable accomplishment of organizing an army of this scale and keeping it together over this expansive territory and for an extended period of time. This is a significant and extraordinary logistical and psychological feat. One of the other things I want to emphasize, I think one of the measures of the success of the Adwa campaign, was that it made the actual battle of Adwa unnecessary. Menelik and Taitu had staged a brilliant campaign and in effect had achieved victory by the end of February. That moment was when Menelik chose to bypass the Italians at Adigrat and to threaten Eritrea. It was the military equivalent of checkmate in a game of chess. What he showed by that move was that he didn't need to fight Baratieri to defeat him. And in fact, Baratieri knew this. He understood that his only real option, given the scale of the army that Menelik had organized, the Italians' only real option was to abandon the conquered territories, to try to save his army, and to retreat into Eritrea to defend it against invasion. It was only because the Italian commander faced intense pressure from subordinate brigadier generals that Baratieri ordered the risky nighttime advance that led to defeat. All right, now let's look at some of the global impacts. The story of Adwa, Menelik, and Taitu dramatically enhanced the stature of Ethiopia throughout the African diaspora. Some, such as Benito Sylvain of Haiti, so from the Caribbean, and Joseph Vitalien of Martinique, also from the Caribbean, recognize the significance of the story out of Ethiopia. In fact, they came to see Ethiopia as a beacon, and they made a pilgrimage from the Americas to the court of Menelik. Others, such as Booker T. Washington, Ida B. Wells, and W.E.B. Du Bois didn't visit Ethiopia in person, but became virtual pilgrims who visited and elaborated an Ethiopia of the imagination. In fact, we might add even the Rastafarians a generation or so later did the same thing. Around the globe, and this is where I want to situate Adwa in the story of European imperialism and conquest and African resistance. Around the globe, Adwa gave the lie to the inevitability of European domination of Africa. A domination was imagined both in political and racial terms. By the 1890s, what passed for common sense predicted a future for Africa that mirrored that of the United States, where native populations had given way before an irresistible tide of European settlers. At the end of the 19th century, that is, at the time of the Battle of Adwa, the culture in Europe and the US and in Europe confidently predicted Africa's future in the language of manifest destiny. In 1896, on the eve of the Battle of Adwa, the Atlanta Constitution noted that Europeans, quote, are all repeating in Africa the work of colonization, which has made America populous. And before them, the Negro must go, as did the Indian in America. So assumptions about political domination and racial domination were intertwined. By setting back one, Adwa shattered the pious certainties about the other. Ethiopian victory was interpreted in racial terms, for not only had an African army defeated a European army, a Black army had defeated a white army. Adwa cast doubt on one of the unshakable certainties of the age, namely that sooner or later Africans would fall under the rule of Europeans. So yes, Adwa is the founding event in the history of modern Ethiopia. Yes, it's a founding trauma in the life of modern Italy, but Adwa is also part of our global heritage. At the end of the 19th century, there's a very strong presumption that Africa would be Europeanized, that is, ruled and settled by Europeans, just as North America had been. Instead, thanks to Adwa, Ethiopia stood as an island of independence, that is, as a glaring and stubborn exception. Nearly 100 years before the abolition of apartheid, Adwa anticipated the long unraveling of European domination of Africa, just as it provoked a rethinking of seemingly settled issues about race. The Battle of Adwa held out the possibility of a different future for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. We really appreciate your time. You've been very generous with your time. One thing I did not say in the beginning was the professor appreciates questions from the audience. If you have any questions, you can post them here. I haven't seen any yet, or you can raise your hand and speak up. In the meantime, I'd like to remind you, we have 2 poems coming up by Kasahun and another video that was we found on YouTube on one of the great unsung heroes from that period. Until I see a question, maybe I can raise something I was thinking about as I was reading the book. Was there how was the availability of reliable information as you were researching for this book? I know you traveled to Ethiopia 3 times. as you're writing this book. It's a great book. I haven't finished it, but it's because I'm a very slow reader. I saw that there was, let me step out from that. Maybe if you could tell us the availability of reliable information, or if you had any challenges as you're working on the book.
Thank you, Adam, for your kind words. Yes, the research process is complicated. This is a book that I wanted to be about, not just about Ethiopia, not just about European empire, but also about the United States. So it's, in a way, it's a triangular story. And that meant, first of all, going to Ethiopia. I knew European archives and languages. I needed time to get to Ethiopia. I went there first in 2004 and returned in 2008 and 2012. And I started by going to Adwa itself. I acquainted myself with as much of Ethiopia as I could, visiting Harar, Gondar, Bahir Dar, Aksum, and other locations. But I wanted to go and see the land. It's very important for me as an historian to see the land, to understand the landscape, to try to learn the place names. So much of the battle as it played out on the 1st of March turned on confusion about place names, about locations. And so I needed to go and make sure that I understood the land as well as I could, so that I wasn't a victim of the same confusion. So that was my first task. I also started getting connected with Ethiopian scholars through conferences, attending conferences and beginning to present work. And I want to acknowledge here the support and kind comments and questions and discussions that came out of that process. The rest of the research, I would say, there were sites in Italy, sites in France, where there are elements of the Adwa story. Ethiopian history, of course, starts in Ethiopia. But I'd like to think that in ECMA, there are people who are thinking about a career as scholars, and it's important to recognize that significant parts of the history of Ethiopia exist outside Ethiopia. And that was part of my vision too, as a scholar who knew European languages and archives, to go through that very rich archival base, that documentary base, and try to make that available to readers. And so that was an important part of my task.
Yeah, Professor, I have a quick question. What inspired you to write this book?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that.
What inspired you to write this book?
Excellent question. It was, I approached this book as effectively as an American. I happened to be at a museum in Boston and I wandered into a photography exhibit, and in there were a group of photographs made by a Bostonian in the 1890s. He's a Bostonian of European descent, but he did studio shots. He would like to hire people in as models and do studio photographs. And one of the photographs that just struck me and was really the origin of this research was a photograph he made of an African-American model. He brought this African-American model into his studio. He dressed them up as he thought Menelik would look, an Ethiopian would look, and then he took a photograph and he called it Menelik. And when I saw this photograph, I thought, what is this photographer doing? The more I looked into it, the more I realized that he had an abolitionist background. His name is Fred Holland Day, and you can look him up. He has an interesting career. But above all, I think what struck me about the photograph was that he understood, just in the weeks after reading about Ethiopian victory at the Battle of Adwa, he understood the larger significance of it, that he immediately took the story of Adwa and brought it into the American context and understood it, the story of Adwa, in terms of a global reevaluation of the relationship not just of race, but also the relationships of power that relate to the US as well as Europe and Africa. So it was this photograph that for me just prompted all kinds of questions. And it was shortly after that that I made plans to go to Ethiopia and to begin research on this project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions from the audience. I'll read the first one as it is. Thank you, Professor, for a great informative and engaging presentation. Is there any documentation on how Emperor Menelik II and his generals devised the strategy to outflank the garrisoned Italian forces?
So that's good. We don't know, actually. We don't have any evidence about specifically how, I mean, because as I've tried to explain, and thank you for this question, the key moment in this campaign is when Menelik II and the Ethiopian forces bypass Adwa. That is the key strategic decision. It's unfortunate, but we don't know very much about how that decision was made. One thing that's clear is that the fighting that had happened at Mekelle was very costly in Ethiopian lives. That the idea of going at the Italians in a fortified position, in assault after assault, was terribly costly. And we do know from sources that there was in the Ethiopian camp great suffering at the casualties and the loss of life that was endured. So certainly the experience of the danger, the terrible cost of life at Mekelle made it clear that they needed to find a way, if they were going to fight the Italians, not to do it by going after the Italians in a fortified position like Mekelle. And so I think, so hence the idea not to go to Adigrat, which would have only put them in a position identical to the one that they had just left. But we don't know very much about how this decision came apart, certainly it began with the horrific experience at Mekelle, and but we don't know. We just don't know the particulars. The sources that we have for Mekelle do a great deal about how much it mattered not to have that kind of confrontation, to fall into the trap of classic European African warfare, where Africans are attacking Europeans with their better armaments in a fortified position. But we don't know about the particulars. I wish we knew more.
Thank you, Professor. We have another question. How would you describe the involvement of Ethiopian Muslims in the war? There are so many confusing narratives out there, and I would like to know what your research says about the involvement and treatment of Muslims during the war, during and after the war. I actually would like to add the involvement of women as well during the war as my own personal question. I want to tag it.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we know that Muslim cavalry played a key role in the battle, notably, first of all, with their reputation, even before the battle happened, that a fearsome reputation meant that the Ethiopian soldiers were already anticipating fearfully what it might mean to engage them in combat. So there is, I guess you could say, a psychological dimension there that needs to be recognized. In practice, in the battle, these cavalry played an important role in the pursuit of the Italian army as it broke up. Some Italians are taken prisoners, others attempt to flee into Eritrea, including Baratieri himself, and they are pursued, abandoning ammunition, supplies along the way. We do have descriptions of that. As for the role of women, as I said, the extraordinary thing, first of all, is that Taitu herself, the Empress herself, she's willing to share in the outcome of this campaign, for better or for worse. Had the Italians won, we can be sure that this would have represented, certainly not only a devastating defeat, but certainly a political humiliation and quite possibly the death of the imperial couple, Menelik and Taitu. So she's risking everything. I think it's also worth pointing out that this is an army, as a militia army, that is not like a conventional army, a European army, say, of the 19th or 20th century, or an American army for that matter, where there's a sharp distinction between combatants and non-combatants, between soldiers and civilians. This is an army where it's not unusual for family members to accompany those who are fighting. This creates problems, of course. That's more mouths to feed, but it's also it means you have a kind of built-in logistics operation, and that's an important feature. We know, for example, that Taitu had properties in the north. We have some evidence that she made resources available from her stores to the army. Once you move though below the level of the empress, it's hard to point to specific examples of women involved in the army or in combat. We know, for example, or rather by an oral tradition in Ethiopia, there is the story of Empress Taitu encouraging soldiers to fight, even with a pistol in her hand. It's a story that we hear repeated. As an example, in terms of the sources I was able to consult, we don't have evidence for that, but we know that oral tradition is an important source when it comes to the history of Ethiopia, and there's a strong representation in there. I would also mention one other source, and in fact use this occasion to recognize the work of Richard Pankhurst, who not only was an extraordinary scholar in the history of Ethiopia, but lived most of his life and taught in Ethiopia, who has an excellent article where he looks at paintings of the Battle of Adwa, and in a very intelligent and insightful way, takes apart how the story, at least as represented in art, how the story of Adwa changes over time. And there's if anyone wants to write, I can send the reference to this article, but it's a brilliant piece of history that draws on oral tradition, draws on textual evidence, but above all on art and art historical evidence to tell the story of Adwa over time, including the role, prominent or otherwise, of women such as Taitu.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I think that's all the questions we have from the audience. I like to point out that the book is available on Amazon. When I ordered it, it arrived the next day. Enjoying it. If the audience would like to ask more questions, is there a way to connect with you after the presentation today? What's the best?
Sure, I'm always happy to, if people have my email address, so they can look me up on the website at the University of Washington, Seattle. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thanks so much for your generosity. We'll continue to the next segment of our program today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Yes,
bye-bye.
Of course. Yeah, I like to say the next couple of programs we have for you are primarily in Amharic. As you strategize your time for the rest of the day, I want to point that out. The other thing is we do have a book raffle, as we'll be sending out 5 copies of the book to the winners. So you want to stay till the end of the program. The next program we have is a poem. It's going to be one of the 2 poems we have for today. Kasa will be reading that for us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Adam. So the first poem I'm going to read is written by Langston Hughes. and it has been translated to Amharic. So I will do my best to share that with you. Okay. It's called የኢትዮጵያ ጥሪ ቀና ይበል ጥቁር ፊታችሁ አበሾች ይብራ ገጻችሁ የሳባ ዘር ናችሁ ይልቃል መሰረታችሁ ከፍታዊ የተራራችሁ የጀግና መጠለያችሁ ጥላ ነው ኩሩ ልባችሁ በቋሚ ጀግንነት እውነት በእናንተ መስዋዕትነት መላው ጥቁር ዘር ይኮራል ይገስፋል አይኑ ይበራል የሳባ ዘሯ ይጣራል አፍሪካን ተነሱ ይላል የማማ የኢትዮጵያ አፈር ነፃ ነው ያበሻ ምድር አፍሪኮች ተነሱ ጽኑ ነፃ ሰው ሁኑ የጥቁር ዜጎች በሙሉ ተነሱ ነፃነት በሉ. So that's the first poem.
Thank you, Kasahun. We appreciate that. I really so for the next one we have for you is a video on one of the heroes, the Jazmach Kabeda Buzunesh. This is was aired on Shaggar Radio, and then we found the video available on YouTube. I'm going to present it. It's 27 minutes. Well, I don't think we'll be looking at all 27 minutes. Let me share my screen. And it's a great story. It's runs pretty slow, but I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
በአምስቱ ዓመት የፋሺስት ኢጣሊያ ወረራ ወቅት ታላቅ ጀብዱ ከፈጸሙት የሀገር ባለውለታ ጀግኖች መሃል ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ አንዱ ነበሩ። ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ ከዚህ ዓለም በሞት ከተለዩ ሰሞኑን 34 ዓመት ይሞላቸዋል። ዛሬ የትዝታችን ርዕሰ ጉዳይ ልናደርጋቸው ወደናል። ለዝግጅታችን ዋቢ የሆነን ጽሑፍ ሲሳይ ንጉሱ ከተለያዩ ምንጮች በማጠናቀር በ1990 ዓ.ም በታተመው ተራሮችን ያንቀጠቀጠ ትውልድ ቅጽ 3 መጽሐፍ ላይ አውጥተውት የነበረው ጽሑፍ ነው። ለጽሑፉ ባለመብት ሲሳይ ንጉሱና ለአሳታሚው ሜጋ አሳታሚ ድርጅት በኒያላ ኢንሹራንስ አክሲዮን ማህበር በእናንተ በአድማጮቻችንና በእኛ በፕሮግራሙ አዘጋጆች ስም ከፍ ያለ ከበሬታ ያዘለ ምስጋና እናቀርባለን። ከበደ ብዙነሽ ከአባታቸው ከአቶ በቸሬ ደበላና ከእናታቸው ከወይዘሮ ወለተ ማርያም ጥቅምት 7 ቀን አርበኛው ከበደ በባንዳው በላይነህ ስም መጠራት ስላልፈለጉ ከበደ ብዙነሽ ተባሉ ይባላል የሚለው እውነት ያዘለ ይመስላል። ወጣቱ ከበደ በንግስት ዘውዲቱ ዘመነ መንግስት 4 ዓመታት ያህል በእልፍኝ አሽከርነት በቤተ መንግስት ውስጥ አገልግለዋል። በኋላም በክቡር ዘበኛ ሰራዊት ውስጥ ገብተው በቂ ወታደራዊ ስልጠና ወስደው የመቶ አለቅነት ማዕረግ አግኝተዋል። ኢጣሊያ በኢትዮጵያ ላይ ጦርነት ለመክፈት የመጀመሪያው የተኩስ ልውውጥ ወልወል ላይ ተጀመረ። በኢትዮጵያም የክተት አዋጅ ነጋሪት ተመታ። ከበደ ብዙነሽ ማይጨው ደርሰው ግዳጃቸውን ተወጡ። ማይጨው ላይ የኢትዮጵያ ሰራዊት ከላይም ከታችም የቦምብ ናዳ እየወረደበት ከፍተኛ መስዋዕትነት ከፈለ፣ ግን አልተሳካም። የኢጣሊያ ጦር በሚያዝያ ወር መጨረሻ በ928 ዋና ከተማችን አዲስ አበባ ገባ። እንደመሸጉት ሌሎች ኢትዮጵያውያን ሁሉ የአባት ሀገር ዱሬ የእናት ሀገር ዱሬ እገባባለሁ የትም የትም ዞሬ የሚለውን ልብ የሚመስጥ ሽለላ እያሰሙ የአርበኝነት ተግባር ጀመሩ። ከበደ ብዙነሽ በ929 ዓ.ም የመጀመሪያውን ትልቅ ጀብዱ ወልመራ ላይ ፈጸሙ። የኢጣሊያ ሰራዊት በዚህ መንገድ እየተተለተለ መምጣቱን ሲሰሙ ከባልደረቦቻቸው ጋር ሆነው ትልቅ ዛፍ ቆርጠው ግንዱን መሃል መንገድ ላይ አጋደሙት። በዚህ ጊዜ የጠላት ጦር ተሽከርካሪዎች ማለፊያ መንገድ አጥተው እየተደራረቡ ለመቆም ተገደዱ። የጦር አዛዦቻቸውም በድንጋጤ ከተሽከርካሪዎቹ ላይ ዘለው እየወረዱ ለማምለጥ ተርበተበቱ። ከበደ ብዙነሽና ተከታዮቻቸው ጫካ ውስጥ አድፍጠው የጥይት ሩምታ እየለቀቁባቸው ነበር። በርካታ ጣሊያኖችና ባንዳዎች ተረፈረፉ። የጣሊያን የጦር መሪዎች የጦርነቱን ክብደት ለመግለጽ ቦታውን ሰኮንዶ ማይጨው ብለው እንዲጠሩ ተገደዋል። ይህ ቦታና በቦታው የተፈጸመው የአርበኝነት ጀብዱ የከበደ ብዙነሽን ስም አገነነው። የፈጸሙት ጀብዱ ለጠላት መርዝ ሆኖ እሳቸውንም ከቤ አባ መርዞ አሰኛቸው። የኢጣሊያ ጦር አዛዦች ከሚፈሩት ስም መሃል አንዱ የኚህ አርበኛ ሆነ። ጠላት ሲከታተላቸው እሳቸውም አቅጣጫቸውን በመቀያየር ወደ አዳበርጋ፣ ግንደበረትና ሜታ ሮቢ የተዘዋወሩ ኖረዋል። በእነዚሁ አካባቢዎች 1500 የሰው ኃይል ይዘው 7000 ባንዳዎችን በመጋፈጥ የበላይነትን ተቀዳጅተው ነበር። ከቤ አባ መርዞ በ930 ዓ.ም ሮቢ ደለታ በተባለው ስፍራ ባደረጉት ውጊያ እግራቸው ላይ፣ ሜታ ሮቢ ጎሮ የጀርሳ ጉቱ በተባለው ስፍራ ደግሞ እጃቸው ላይ ጥይት ቆስለዋል። ያም ሆኖ ቁስላቸው ትንሽ ጠገግ ሲላቸው ተመልሰው ጦር ሜዳ ናቸው። ዱላ ቆርቻ ጎላና ጎሮ በተባለው ስፍራ ከታላላቅ አርበኞች ጋር በመሰለፍ ግዙፉን የጠላት ጦር መክተዋል። በተለያየ ጊዜም በርካታ ንብረትና የጦር መሳሪያ ከጠላት እጅ ማርከዋል። ከቤ አባ መርዞ ጥብቅ ሃይማኖተኛና አማኝ ነበሩ። የጦር መሳሪያቸውን አንግበው ዝናራቸውን ታጥቀው ፀጉራቸውን አጎፍረው ግንባራቸውን አኮማትረው የተቆጣ አንበሳ ሆነው በታላቅ ወኔና ድፍረት እየፎከሩ ጦርነት ውስጥ ከመግባታቸው በፊት ዘወትር የእግዚአብሔርን እርዳታ በጸሎት ይለምናሉ። ከዚህ በተጨማሪ ከቄሶች ጋር የማርያምን ጽላት አስከትለው ወደ ጦርነት ይጓዙ ነበር። ከበደ ብዙነሽና ሌሎች አርበኞች ከሸኖ ባንዶች ጋር ሲዋጉ አንድ ቄስ ይዟት ለመጣው የማርያም ጽላት ኩርጴ ላይ ቤተክርስቲያን አሰርተውላት አርበኛዋ ማርያም በሚል መጠሪያ የአርበኞች መቀበሪያ ሆና ነበር። የአርበኞቹ የ5 ዓመት ተጋድሎ በከንቱ አልቀረም። የድል ጊዜ ተቃረበ። በ932 ዓ.ም መጨረሻ ላይ ኢጣሊያና እንግሊዝ ቅራኔ ውስጥ ገብተው ጦር ተማዘዙ። ሁለቱም የወቅቱ ኃያላን ቅኝ ገዢዎች ሲሆኑ ያጣላቸውም የጥቅም ጥያቄ ነበር። ይህ ሁኔታ ለኢትዮጵያ መልካም አጋጣሚን ፈጠረ። እንግሊዞች የኢትዮጵያን አርበኞች ለመርዳት ወሰኑ። በዚሁም የእንግሊዝ እርዳታና የአርበኞች ተጋድሎ ጣሊያኖች ተሸነፉና ኢትዮጵያ ነፃ ወጣች። ከቤት ንብረቱ የተፈናቀለው ሕዝብም ወደ ቤቱ ተመለሰ። አርበኞች የነፃነት ባንዲራቸውን ከፍ አድርገው ወደ ሰላማዊ ኑሮ ሲመለሱ እንግዲህ በአገሬ ነጭ ጤፍ አይብቀል አረም ነው እያሉ ከስሩ ነው መንቀል በማለት ፎከሩ። ከበደ ብዙነሽ ለአርበኝነታቸው ውለታ ወልመራ ላይ አንድ ጋሻ መሬት ተሰጣቸው። ይህ ቦታ የኢጣሊያንን ጦር አንበርክከው ሰኮንዶ ማይጨው ያሰኙበት ነበር። እዚህ መሬት ላይ የዛፍ ችግኞችን ግጥግጥ አድርገው ተከሉ። ከዛፍ ችግኞቹ ጎን የከብት እርባታ ጀመሩ። ይህን የሚሰሩት የገነት ወረዳ ገዥና የክብር ዘበኛ ሻለቃ ጦር አዛዥ ሆነው ነበር። በጦርነቱ ጊዜ አቅፎና ደግፎ የያዛቸውን የገነት ሕዝብ አሁንም በስልጣናቸው ያገለግሉት ጀመር። መንገድ፣ ውሃ፣ መብራት፣ ትምህርት ቤት የመሳሰሉትን መሰረታዊ ፍላጎቶች ለሕዝቡ እንዲደርሱ በየአቅጣጫው ጉትጎታ ያዙ። ወደ በኋላ ላይ ሆለታ አርብ ገበያ 45,000 ካሬ ቦታ ከግል ይዞታቸው ሰጥተው ለትምህርት ቤት መስሪያ አውለዋል። ከበደ ብዙነሽ ብዙ ቦታዎች በከፍተኛ የስልጣን ደረጃ ሰጥተዋል። በሲዳሞ ጠቅላይ ግዛት የጀምጀም አውራጃ ገዥና የማዕድኑ የበላይ ኃላፊ ነበሩ። አዶላ በመባል የምትታወቀውን የወርቅ ስፍራ ክብረ መንግስት ያሰኙም እሳቸው ናቸው ይባላል። ከበደ ብዙነሽ በያዙት ስራ ላይ የደጃዝማችነት ማዕረግ የተሰጣቸው እዚሁ ክብረ መንግስት በነበሩበት ጊዜ ነው። ይህ ሲሆን በ40ዎቹ መጀመሪያ ዕድሜ ላይ ነበሩ። በአስተዳደራዊ ስራቸው ላይ መጠንከራቸውና በንጹህ ሕሊና መስራታቸው ራሳቸውን ቢያኮራቸውም ለግል ጥቅማቸው ያደሩ ከፍተኛ ሹማምንቶች ጋር ያጋጫቸው ነበር። ጥብቅ ሃይማኖተኛነታቸውና ንጽህናቸው እምብዛም አልተወደደላቸውም። በመጨረሻ ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ እዚህ ቦታ ሆነው ከባለስልጣኖች ጋር ተስማምተውና ተሻርከው የሀገር ሀብት እየዘረፉ ለመኖር ሕሊናቸው ስላልፈቀደላቸው ሌሎች ይምጡና ይጨማለቁበት ብለው የማዕድኑን የበላይ ኃላፊነት በፈቃዳቸው ለቀው በራሳቸው ጥያቄ ወደ ትውልድ አካባቢያቸው በመመለስ የመናገሻ አውራጃ ገዢ ሆኑ። እዚህም ቢሆን ግን ሰላማዊ ስራ አልጠበቃቸውም። ባላባቶችና መኳንንቶች የህዝቡን መሬት እየቀሙ ገበሬውን ሲያስለቅሱ ተመለከቱ። ምስኪኑ ገበሬ ሮሮውን በማሰማት ላይ ነበር። ከየወረዳዎቹ በጥቅሉ 12 ጋሻ መሬት ያህል ተቀምጧል። ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ የክልላቸውን የወረዳ አስተዳዳሪዎች ሰብስበው በጉዳዩ ላይ ከመከሩ በኋላ ሁሉንም አሳምነው ያለ አግባብ የተወሰደው 12 ጋሻ መሬት ለህዝቡ እንዲመለስ አደረጉ። ይህ ሁኔታ መኳንንቶችን ክፉኛ አስቆጣ። የደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ የቅርብ ወዳጅ የነበሩት መኮንን አብዶል ሳይቀሩ አኮረፉ፣ ተጣሏቸው። ከቤም ተከሰው ጃንሆይ ፊት ቀረቡ። ምንድነው የምንሰማው? መሬት ከትላልቆቹ እየቀማህ ለትናንሾቹ ማከፋፈል ጀምረሃል አሉ። መሬቱ መጀመሪያውንም ያለ አግባብ ከህዝቡ የተነጠቀ ነበር። እኔ አውራጃ ገዢ ሆኜ በሄድኩ ጊዜ አቤት ባዩ በዛ። ወረዳ አስተዳዳሪዎችን ሰብስቤ ሳነጋግር ደግሞ መሬቱ ለገበሬው እንዲመለስ ወሰኑ እንጂ የኔ የግል ውሳኔ አይደለም ብለው ማስረጃቸውን አቀረቡ። ህዝቡንና አስተዳዳሪዎቹን አቅፈው የፈጸሙት ባላባቱና ገበሬውን የሚያደፋፍር ተግባር ነው ተብሎ በቤተ መንግስቱና በመኳንንቱ ዘንድ ጥርስ አስነከሰባቸው። ከህዝቡ ጋር የፈጠሩት ትስስር እያደር አስኪ ደረጃ ላይ ሊደርስ ይችላል በሚል ግምት ወደ ሌላ አካባቢ ማዛወር አስፈላጊ ሆኖ ተገኘ። ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ ከምዕራብ ወደ ምስራቅ መጥተው የኤረርና ከረዩ አውራጃ ገዢ ሆነው ተሾሙ። ጉቦና ምልጃ ፈጽሞ የማይወዱትና በጣም የሚጠሉት ከበደ ብዙነሽ በሰሩት ቦታ ሁሉ በዚህ ጸባያቸው ይታወቃሉ። የኤረርና ከረዩ ገዢ ሆነው እንደተሾሙ ይህንን ጸባያቸውን የማያክሰው 1000 ብር እጅ መንሻ ላከላቸው ይባላል። ከቤ ድፍረቱ አናዷቸው ጉቦ አምጪውን አሳስረው ገንዘቡን በደረሰኝ ለገንዘብ ሚኒስቴር ገቢ አድርገዋል። መኳንንቱ የደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽን አርአያነት በመከተል ፈንታ ይናደዱባቸው፣ ያዝኑባቸውና ይሳለቁባቸው ነበር ይባላል። ከመጣላታቸው በፊት የቅርባቸው የነበሩት መኮንን ሀብተወልድ ለጃንሆይ ያቀረቡት አቤቱታ ይህንኑ የሚያመለክት ነበር። ከበደ ብዙነሽ እኮ አዲስ አበባ ውስጥ ለቤት መስሪያ የሚሆን የከተማ ቦታ እንኳ የለውም በማለት በተዘዋዋሪ ለመኑላቸው። ታዲያ እኛ ለመነን ልንሰጠው ነበር በማለት ጃንሆይም የምጸት መልሳቸውን ሰጡ ይባላል። ከበደም አለምንም በማለት በኩራታቸው ጸኑ። በእርግጥም ወደ ኋላ ላይ አዲስ አበባ የሚገኘው መኖሪያ ቤታቸውን ያሰሩት በዘመዶቻቸው እርዳታና ግፊት ነበር ይባላል። ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ ከምግብ ጥሬ ስጋ ይወዳሉ። የአልኮል መጠጥ ግን አይደፍሩም። በትርፍ ጊዜያቸው አትክልት መኮትኮት ያዘወትሩ እንደነበረ በቅርብ የሚያውቋቸው ይመሰክራሉ። ዛፍ የሚቆርጥና እንስሳ የሚገድል አይወዱም። ዛፍ ተተክሎ የሚያድግበትን ረጅም ዕድሜ ያውቁታል። በወጣትነታቸው እሳቸው ራሳቸው አደን ሄደው ግዳይ የጣሉ ቢሆንም በኋላም አመለካከታቸው ተለውጧል። እንደ ሰው ታጥቀው ፍልሚያ የማይገጥሙና ተጠንቅቀው የማይመክቱ እንስሳትንም ሆነ አራዊትን መግደል ጀግንነት አይደለም፣ የአስተሳሰብ ድህነት ነው ይሉ ነበር። የኤረርና ከረዩ አውራጃ ገዢ በነበሩ ጊዜ የወንጂ ስኳር ፋብሪካ ሹም የነበረ አንድ ሰው አጋዘን ገደልኩ እኮ አላቸው። ምን አደረገ ብለው ኩም አደረጉት ይባላል። በዚህ አላበቁም። በፖሊስ አስይዘው መሳሪያውን እንዲያስረክብ አስደርገውታል። በ1950ዎቹ አጋማሽ ላይ የሜጫና ቱለማ መረዳጃ ማህበር ሲቋቋም ለደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ ታላቅ የምስራች ነበር። የሚታና ያዳበርጋ የልማት ማህበርን ወለዱ። የሚጫቱ ለማ መረዳጃ ማህበር ሲቋቋም ስሙ እንደሚያመለክተው የልማት ማህበር ነበር። ያላዊነት ፖሊሲ በገነነበትና የጭቆና አገዛዝ በተንሰራፋበት ሀገር በአረንጓዴነቱ መቀጠል አልቻለም። ወደ አመፅ የሚሸጋገርበት ጊዜ መጣ። የ1950ዎቹ መጨረሻ ጥቅምት 5 ቀን 1959 ዓ.ም የሚጫቱ ለማ መረዳጃ ማህበር በአርሲ ክፍለ ሀገር ኤራ ከተማ ላይ ቅርንጫፍ ጽሕፈት ቤት ለማቋቋም የጠራው ስብሰባ በመንግስት ተከለከለ። የጸጥታ ክፍሉም የማስጠንቀቂያውን ወረቀት ለማህበሩ አመራር አባላትና ለሚመለከታቸው ሁሉ በተነ። ይሁን እንጂ ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽና ብርጋዴር ጀነራል ታደሰ ብሩ ከሌሎች የአመራር አባሎቻቸው ጋር ሆነው በቆራጥነት ወደ ቦታው ሄዱ። ህዝቡም በደማቅ ሁኔታና በሙሉ ልብ ተቀበላቸው። የጸጥታ ክፍሉ ለስብሰባው መከልከል የሰጠው ምክንያት ህዝቡ አይፈልግም የሚል ነበር። ህዝቡ ግን በአዳራሽ ውስጥ ግጥም ብሎ በመገኘት ፍላጎቱን አሳየ። ስብሰባው ተካሄደ። ርዕሰ ጉዳዩ ልማት ነበር። የማህበሩን ቅርንጫፍ ማቋቋምና የገንዘብ መዋጮ ማሰባሰብ ከዚሁ ጋር ተያይዞ የሚሄድ ጉዳይ ነበር። በአመራሩ ቀስቃሽነትና በራስ አነሳሽነት ለልማት የሚውል ገንዘብ ተሰበሰበ። በዚህ ሁኔታ ሁሉም ነገር በሰላም ተጠብቆ የተሰበሰበው ህዝብ ሊበተን ሲል ከውጪ የተኩስ ሩምታ ተለቀቀበት። በጸጥታው ክፍል በመታዘዝ በቦታው ደርሶ ተኩሱን የከፈተው የፈጥኖ ደራሽ ፖሊስ ነበር። በተኩሱ 2 ሰዎች ሲሞቱ አንዲት ሴት ቆሰለች። የሚጫቱ ለማ ማህበርና መንግስት ደም ተቃቡ። ከጤራው ስብሰባ በኋላ መንግስት በማህበሩ መሪዎች ላይ ሌት ተቀን ክትትል ማድረግ ጀመረ። የጸጥታ ሰዎች ጥላ ሆነው እንቅስቃሴያቸውን ሁሉ እንደሚከታተሏቸውና በቅርቡ የተሰነቀላቸው ነገር እንዳለ አባላቱ እያወቁ መጡ። ሳይቀደሙ ለመቅደም ከበደ ብዙነሽና ታደሰ ብሩ በንጉሠ ነገሥቱ ላይ የአመፅ ክንዳቸውን ለማንሳት ተስማሙ። ጥቅምት 23 ቀን 1959 ዓ.ም የንጉሠ ነገሥቱ የዘውድ በዓል ሲከበር በንጉሱ ላይ አደጋ ለመጣልና ፈንቅለ መንግስት ለማካሄድ ጀነራል ታደሰ ብሩ ቤት ውስጥ እቅዱ ተነድፎ ቅድመ ዝግጅቱ ተካሄደ። በበዓል ንግሱ ዋዜማ ጥቅምት 22 ቀን 1959 ዓ.ም ማታ ከበደ ብዙነሽ፣ ታደሰ ብሩና ሌሎች የአመራር አባላት ከፈርሳ መንገድ ላይ በሚገኘው ፒፒኖ ሆቴል ተገናኙ። ወደ ማዘዣ ጣቢያ ቀረብ ማለታቸው ነው። አደጋውን መጣል ብቻ ሳይሆን ከዚያ በኋላ ለሚከሰቱት ችግሮችም መዘጋጀት ነበረባቸው። ሆኖም ይህ በደንብ አልተጠናም። እዚያው ሌሊቱን አድረው እጅግ በጋለ ስሜት የሥራ ክፍፍል አደረጉ። የደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ ድርሻ ወልመራ ወደሚገኘው ቤታቸው ሄደው ያላቸውን መሳሪያ በማደል የትጥቅ ድጋፍ መስጠት ሆነ። በዚህ መሰረትም ወደ ወልመራ ገሰገሱ። ወልመራ ጣሊያኖች ላይ ድል ተቀዳጅተውበት ሰኮንዶ ማጨው ያሰኙት ቦታ የከበደ ብዙነሽ የጦር ሜዳ ክልል ሆኖ ተቆጥሯል። ለአካባቢው ሕዝብ ከበደ ብዙነሽ ሁሉም ነገር ናቸው። በጦርነት ጊዜ ጀግና ምሳሌ፣ በሰላም ጊዜ ደግሞ የልማት ምሳሌ ናቸው። በጦርነቱ ዘመን ደማቸውን አፍስሰው በተዋጉላት በዚች ቦታ ላይ በልማቱ ጊዜ ትምህርት ቤት፣ መንገድና ቤተክርስቲያን አሰርተውበታል። ከከበደ ብዙነሽ ጋር መሞት ለሕዝቡ ጀግንነት ነበር። ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ በዚህ ሁኔታ ተዘጋጅተው ሲጠብቁ የማህበሩ የአመራር አባል የሆነው ዶክተር ሞጋ ፍሪሳ መጣ። ዶክተር ሞጋ ፍሪሳ አዲስ አበባ ገብቶ አደጋ የመጣል እቅዳቸው ያለ ሙከራ መክሸፉን አረጋግጦ መምጣት ነበር። የንጉሠ ነገሥቱ የዘውድ በዓል ያለአንዳች እንከን በደመቀ ሁኔታ ተከብሮ አለፈ። ትንሿ የመፈንቅለ መንግስት ሙከራ ሐሳብ ከሽፋለች። የመንግስት የጸጥታ ክፍል የነታደሰ ብሩን እቅድ በቅድሚያ ስለደረሰበት ምንም አይነት ሙከራ ሳያደርጉ ለማኮላሸት ችሏል። አደጋ የመጣሉን ግዳጅ የወሰዱት የማህበሩ አባል ወታደሮች አንዲት ቦምብ እንኳን ሳይወረውሩ በቅድሚያ ከያሉበት ተለቅመው ታሰሩ። በርካታ አባላት የመንግስት ጥቃት ሰለባ ሆኑ። የጀነራል ታደሰ ብሩ ቤት በጸጥታ ሰዎች ዙሪያውን ተከቦ ሲፈተሽ እሳቸው በርቀት ጫካ ውስጥ ተደብቀው ሁኔታውን ይከታተሉ ነበር። በኋላም አንድ ሰው በስውር ልከው ቤታቸው ውስጥ ምን እየተደረገ እንደሆነ ተረዱ። በጣም የሚያስደንቀው ነገር በጸጥታ ሰዎች ታጅበው ቤታቸው ውስጥ የገቡት ትልቁ ካህን ሊቀ ስልጣናት አባ ሀብተ ማርያም መሆናቸው ነበር ይባላል። ታደሰ ብሩ ከበደ ብዙነሽን ፍለጋ ወደ ወልመራ ጉዞ የጀመሩት ከዚህ በኋላ ነበር። ከቤ አባ መርዞ በእቅዳቸው መክሸፍ አዘኑ። እዚሁ ወልመራ ላይ ሆኖ የሚመጣባቸውን ከመመከት ሌላ ምርጫ አልነበራቸውም። ወደ ማታ አካባቢ ከየት መጡ ሳይባል ሊቀ ስልጣናት አባ ሀብተ ማርያም ከበደ ብዙነሽ ቤት ድረስ ከተፋሉ። አመጣጣቸው በአንድ በኩል ከበደ ብዙነሽን ለመያዝ ሲሆን፣ በሌላ በኩልም ታደሰ ብሩን ቤታቸው ሄደው ስላጧቸው ወደዚህ እንደሚመጡ በመገመት ነበር። ሆኖም ታደሰ ብሩና ተከታዮቻቸው አካባቢውን እያጠኑ ጫካውን ስለሚጓዙ ገና እዚህ አልደረሱም ነበር። ልዕልት ተናኘ ወርቅ ናቸው የላኩኝ። የምናገረው ቃል በእሳቸው አንደበት የተነገረኝ ስለመሆኑ አሁንም በእግዚአብሔር ስም እምላለሁ። እርስ በርሳችን ለምን እንተላለቃለን ብለዋል። እስካሁን ለተፈጸመው ጥፋት በሙሉ ጃንሆይ ምህረት እንዲሰጡ አደርጋለሁና ወደ ቤታቸው ይግቡ ብለዋል። ይህንን ግን እስከ ምሽቱ 5 ሰዓት ድረስ ባትፈጽሙ ክቡር ዘበኛን አዛለሁ ብለዋል። የምናገረው እግዚአብሔርን ስም ጠርቼ ነው አሉ አባ ሀብተ ማርያም። ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ የእኚህን የሃይማኖት አባት ድብቅ ተልእኮ ምንም ሳይጠራጠሩ በመንፈሳዊ እምነታቸውና አክብሮታቸው ብቻ ልባቸው መለስለስ ጀምሮ በመጨረሻ የወረወሯት የማስፈራሪያ ሐረግ ግን ከቤን ቱግ አድርጋ አስቆጣቻቸው። አባ ለማስፈራራት ነው እንደመጡት? የፈለጉትን ጦር ይዘዙ በሏቸው። የከቤ አባ መርዞ 3ኛ ማጮ ነው ማደርገው ብለው ግንባራቸውን አቆማትረው ጡቶቻቸውን አንቀጫቀጩ። ይህ ቁጣቸው አባ ሀብተ ማርያም አስደነገጠ። እኛ አዛውንት አርበኛ እንደ ወጣት ጀብደኛ ቱግ ብለው ይነሳሉ የሚል ግምት አልነበራቸውም። አባ ሀብተ ማርያም ከማስፈራራት ይልቅ ማባበልና ማግባባት እንደሚሻል ተገንዝበው አቅጣጫውን ለወጡ። ጃንሆይም ራሳቸው ከበደን መያዝ በዘዴ ነው ይሉ ነበርና ደጃዝማች እኛ እኮ ልዕልት ጋር ሁነን ሁኔታውን ለማስተካከል ነው የምንጥረው። በእግዚአብሔር ስም ይዤዎታለሁ የምልዎትን ይፈጽሙልኝ። ይህንንም ለማድረግ በቅድሚያ የአምላክን ስም ጠርተው ይማሉልኝ። ከበደ ብዙነሽ የእግዚአብሔር ስም ሲጠራና መስቀሉ ከፊታቸው ሲደቀን የተቆጣው ስሜታቸው በአንድ የቀዘቀዘ። ጦሩን ሳይሆን መስቀሉን ፈርተው ተሸነፉ። ከዚህ በኋላ መንገዱ ሁሉ ለአባ ሀብተ ማርያም ቁልቁለት ሆነላቸው። እንግዲያውስ ጀነራል ታደሰ ብሩ የት እንዳሉ ይንገሩኝ። ጀነራል ታደሰ ከአዲስ አበባ አልመጣም። ይህ የሰጡኝ ቃል እውነት ለመሆኑ በእግዚአብሔር ስም ይማሉልኝ። እግዚአብሔር ይመስክርብኝ፣ ይሄ ልጅ እንኳ አሁን ከእሱ ዘንድ መምጣቱ ነው ብለው ወደ ዶክተር ሞጋ ፍሪሳ አመለከቱ። እርስዎ ከአሁን ወዲያ ለጸብ እንደማይዘጋጁ በእግዚአብሔር ስም ይማሉልኝ እንጂ በጃንሆይ በኩል ቀደም ሲል ቃሌ እንደሰጠሁት ሁሉ እስካሁን ላለው ነገር ምህረት እንደሚያሰጡ ልዕልት ቃላቸውን ሰጥተውኛል። በዚህ አይነት ተማምለውና ተማምነው የደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽና የጀነራል ታደሰ ብሩ ሚስቶች በመያዣነት ከአባ ሀብተ ማርያም ጋር ወደ ልዕልት ተናኘ ወርቅ ኃይለሥላሴ ቤት እንዲሄዱ ተደረገ። ባሎቻቸው ቃላቸውን አጥፈው ለጸብ እንደማይነሱ ማረጋገጫ መሆናቸው ነበር። ልዕልት ቤት ከምሽቱ 5 ሰዓት ደረሱ። በማግስቱ ጥቅምት 24 ቀን 1959 ዓ.ም ከንጋቱ 12 ሰዓት ሲሆን አባ ሀብተ ማርያም ፓትርያርኩን ብፁዕ አቡነ ቴዎፍሎስን ይዘው ከበደ ብዙነሽ ቤት እንደገና ሄዱ። አቡነ ቴዎፍሎስም በተራቸው መስቀላቸውን አውጥተው ከበደ ብዙነሽን ገዘቱ። ከዚህ በኋላ ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ መጀመሪያ ወደ ልዕልት ተናኘ ወርቅ ግቢ፣ ቀጥሎም ወደ ቤተ መንግስት ሄደው ጃንሆይ ፊት ቀረቡ። ለማንኛውም ምህረት አደረጉ። ከበደ ብዙነሽም ከቤተ መንግስት መልስ የእርቁን መልእክት ለአባሎቻቸው አስተላለፉ። እነ ጀነራል ታደሰ ብሩም በየተራ ጃንሆይ ፊት ቀርበው ምህረቱን ተቀበሉ። እንደታጠቁ ፍልሚያውን ሲጠባበቁ የነበሩት ተከታዮቻቸውም መሳሪያቸውን እያስቀመጡ ተመለሱ። እርቁም ሆነ ምህረቱ ከልብ የመነጨ ቢሆን መልካም ነበር። ጃንሆይ የይቅርታ ፈገግታ ግን አልቆየም። ልብሳቸውን ጨርሰው እንግዶቻቸውን ሸኝተው ከተረጋጉ በኋላ ሁሉንም በየተራ ቀጧቸው። የአመራር አባላቱን ከፋፍለውና ነጣጥለው በመቅጣት ማህበሩን አፈራረሱት። የከበደ ብዙነሽና የጃንሆይም ግንኙነት ተቀየረ። በ1966 ዓ.ም በሀገሪቱ የስርዓት ለውጥ መጣ። አብዮት ፈነዳ። ንጉሠ ነገሥቱ ከስልጣናቸው ወርደው ወታደራዊ ደርግ ቦታውን ያዘ። መኳንንቱ ሁሉ በሰልፍ እጁን ሰጠ። 67 የቀድሞ ባለስልጣኖችና ሚኒስትሮች ተረሸኑ ያለምንም ጥያቄና ፍርድ። ከበደ ብዙነሽ አባ መርዞ ይህን ሲመለከቱ በቀጥታ ወደ ለመዱት ጫካ ገቡ። ይህ ሲሆን የ65 ዓመት አዛውንት ነበሩ። ወታደራዊ ደርግም ጡንቻውን አፈርጥሞ የፍየል ወጠጤ እያዘፈነ ወደ አደን ተሰማራ። የደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ አንድ ዘመድ አሉበት ድረስ ሄዶ በማግባባት ሊመልሳቸው ሞከረ። ደጃዝማች እርሶ ጫካ የሚገቡበት ምንም ምክንያት የለም፣ ሁላችንም እናውቆታለን። በስልጣኑ አልባለጉም፣ የህዝብ ሀብት አልዘረፉም፣ በህዝብ ደም አልተነካኩም። እንዲያውም ህዝቡን በልማት ሲያገለግሉ ነው የኖሩት። ከንጉሠ ነገሥቱና ከመኳንንቱ ጋር የነበረውትንም ቅራኔ ብዙ ሰው ያውቀዋል። ወደ ሰላማዊ ኑሮ መመለስ ይኖርብዎታል አላቸው። እሳቸውም በከንቱ አትድከም ልጄ፣ እኔ ከቤ አባ መርዞ ያለ ፍርድ በጅምላ ለሚረሽን መንግስት እጄን አልሰጥም። እንደ አፄ ቴዎድሮስ አንድ ጥይት እስኪቀረኝ ድረስ ተዋግቼ የጀግና ሞት ሞታለሁ። የጫካውን ኑሮም እየለመድኩት ነው። ጥንት የማውቀው ስለሆነ ለእኔ አዲስ አይደለም ብለው መለሱለት። ተስፋ ቆርጦ ተመለሰ። ሌላም ጊዜ ደግሞ ሌሎች ዘመዶቻቸው ሽማግሌ ይዘው ሄደው ለምነዋቸዋል ይባላል። እኔ እጅ መስጠት አይሆንልኝም፣ እጅ መስጠት አላቅማ። አሁን ምንም ባረጅ በጊዜ ጠላትን ያርበረብርኩ አርበኛ እኮ ነኝ አሉ ከቤ አባ መርዞ። መልእክተኞቹ ሌላ አማራጭ ይዘው ቀረቡ። እንግዲያውስ በዚህ ዕድሜዎ ጦርነት ውስጥ ከሚገቡ ወደ ሱዳን ሄዱ፣ ገንዘብም ሆነ ማንኛውንም ነገር ለመርዳት ዝግጁ ነን አሏቸው። ደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ ግን ስደት መረጣችሁልኝ? ወደ ምድረ ሱዳን ስደት? አመሰግናለሁ። እንኳን አሁን በዚህ ዕድሜ ቀርቶ ያኔም በወጣትነቴ በጠላት ወረራ ጊዜ አልተሰደድኩም። እኔ እዚቹ በሰላም ጊዜ መግባ ያኖረች መሬት ውስጥ ነው የምቀበረው። በመከራ ሰዓት አልሸሻትም። ይልቅስ አንድ ነገር ልንገራችሁ፣ ትንቢት ነው የምነግራችሁ። ይህ ወታደሮች መንግስት 7 ዓመት ይቆያል። 7ቷን ካለፈ ደግሞ 17 ዓመት ይቆያል። ለዚህ ዘወትር ጸልዩ፣ እግዚአብሔርን ለምኑ። እኛ 5ቱን የፋሽስት ወረራ ዘመን በዱር በገደሉ ያሳለፍነው እየተዋጋንና እየጸለይን ነው። 17ኛውን ዓመት ያለፈ እንደሆነ እስከ 30 ዓመት ሊቆይ ይችላል። ነገር ግን 17ኛውን አያልፋትም። እኔም 5 የስደት ዓመት እንደሚኖርብኝ ባታ ይነግሩኛል። በሰው ሀገር ሳይሆን በገዛ ሀገሬ ነው የምሰደደው ብለው መለሱላቸው። ከዚህ በኋላ ዘመዶቻቸው ወደ የመጡበት ተመልሰው ሄደው የሚያስፈልጓቸውን ነገሮች በርቀት መላክ ቀጠሉ። በመጨረሻም ታህሳስ 18 ቀን 1972 ዓ.ም የደርግ ሰራዊት ከባድ መሳሪያ ይዞ ከበባቸው። ከቤ አባ መርዞ ቀድሞ እንደፎከሩትም አንድ ጥይት እስኪቀራቸው ድረስ ተታኮሱ። ጦርነቱ ቀላል አልነበረም። ጠላቶቻቸው ከቤ የተጠለሉበትን የአፈር ቤት ሳይቀር በላውንቸር ደብድበዋል። ይህንን አዛውንት አርበኛ ገናና ዝና የሚያውቁና የሰሙም ሁሉም በርቀት መዋጋቱን መርጧል። አንድ ኩባዊ ወታደር ግን የከበደ ብዙነሽን እጅ ይዞ ለመማረክ ተመኘ። ከቤ ከርቀት ሲመለከቱት ሰኮንዶ ማጮ ላይ የቀጡት ኢጣሊያዊ አሁን ብድሩ ሊመልስ ከደርግ ጋር ተሰልፎ የመጣባቸው መስሏቸውም ይሆናል። ኢላማቸው ላይ ሲገባላቸው አነጣጥረው ተኮሱበት። ኩባዊ ወታደር ባፍጢሙ ድፍት ብሎ ቀረ። ነጭ ፊቱ ቁር አፈር ለበሰ። ጠላቶቻቸው እንዲህ የቀረቡ ከመማገድ ይልቅ ከርቀት እየተታኮሱ ጥይታቸውን ማስጨረሱን መረጡ። 2 ቀን ሲታኮሱ ውለው አደሩ። በሶስተኛው ቀን ግን ከቤ አባ መርዞ ተሸነፉ። ክፉኛ ተመትተው ስለቆሰሉ ራሳቸውን መቆጣጠር አቃታቸው። ጩኸታቸውና ፉከራቸው የቅዠት አይነት ነበር፣ ሙሉ በሙሉ አይሰማም። ጥቂት ቆይቶ የአንዲት ጥይት ድምፅ ሲሰማ ለጠላቶቻቸው የምስራቸው ነው። የመጨረሻዋን ጥይት ጠጥተው እስከ ዘላለሙ አረፉ፣ እንቅላፉ። ሁሉም ነገር ጸጥ ረጭ አለ። የሚገርመው ነገር ግን የደጃዝማች ከበደ ብዙነሽ አባ መርዞ ትንቢት መያዙ ነበር። እሳቸው ጫካ በገቡ ልክ በ5 ዓመታቸው ሞቱ። ደርግም ስልጣን በያዘ በ17 ዓመቱ ወደቀ። ጠንካራው መንፈሳዊ እምነታቸው ገልጦ ያሳያቸው ራዕይ ይሆን?
Thank you all. Thank you very much. That was the audio part of our presentation. For the next part, Kasahun will read us another poem. Thank you.
ሁለተኛውን ፖም በላንግስቶን ሂውስ ነው። የኢትዮጵያ ጥሪ። ኢትዮጵያ አቀኝ ፊትሽን ጥቁሩን ጨለማ አበሻ የሳባ ልጅ ዝርያ ዘንባቦችሽ ረጃጅም ተራሮችሽ የመጠቁ መጠለያ ናቸው ጋሻ ለነፃነት ሲሉ ለሚወድቁ በመስዋዕትነትሽ ፈለግ መላው አፍሪካ ይነሳ አይኑ እሳት ጎርሶ ፊቱ ድቅድቅ ጨለማን ለብሶ የሳባን ዘር ጥሪ ሰምቶ ነፃ ናት ኢትዮጵያ እናንተም ሁኑ እንዲያ መላው አፍሪካ ተነሱና ሁኑ ነፃ የጥቁር ህዝቦች ሁሉ ነፃ ሁኑ ነፃ ሁኑ።
Thank you, Kasahun. That was amazing. So we're going to conclude our event today by bringing back the guest. She will announce the winners of the raffle as well as any last messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you all for attending. We hope you leave today with a revitalized appreciation and understanding of Ethiopian history. I'd like to thank Dr. Raymond Jonas for his participation and the organizers, Adam, Gashbrahane, Kasaun, and the rest of the ECMA board working behind the scenes for making this event happen. Before we conclude, I would like to announce the winners of our raffle. So we randomly selected 5 attendees to receive a copy of The Battle of Adwa, African Victory in the Age of Empire, written by today's panelist, Dr. Raymond Jonas. So as you see on the screen, by Tadisa, Yodit Mogus, Christine Briscoe, Rahel Yigzau, and Napoleon Ahmed are our winners for today. We will reach out to you via email to coordinate how to get these books to you. So congratulations. And I would also like to announce the winner of our virtual journey to Adwa. Starting in November, we challenged everyone to participate in the initiative that was started by a group of young Ethiopians in Addis Ababa to pay tribute to Adwa. They would walk from Addis Ababa to Adwa, which is the same distance that the heroes did, 593 miles. Out of all the participants, we want to congratulate our own Kasaun, who logged a total of 752 miles. And all the other participants for taking this journey. So congratulations, Kasaun. You'll also receive a copy of Dr. Jonas's book. So with all of that, congratulations to the winners again, and thank you all for attending our event today. We hope to see you at future ECMA events. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you all. See you soon. Bye-bye.